Hello there, and welcome to today's deep dive at Beyond. And today really is going to be a deep dive because thanks to our friends at White Light with their SmartStage technology, we're able to bring this session from inside a project, literally inside a project. And the project is FRAMERATE from ScanLab. So I'm delighted to be joined by Matt Shaw from ScanLab, a really exciting UK company that's pushing the boundaries of what we think of as scanning technology. Matt, we're obviously in a virtual world, but it's a very specific place, isn't it? So where the hell are we?
Yeah, so this is Felbrigg Manor. We're actually in the vegetable garden at Felbrigg Manor, but it doesn't look at its most exciting today because we're there in the middle of winter. And there's a reason we're here in the middle of winter, because this is the very start point of our FRAMERATE project. So this is day one in a project which saw us scan this space every single day for an entire year.
So we're sitting we're standing where the scanner would have stood.
Exactly.
Every day for a year?
Every day for a year.
Okay.
And we can just have a little peek around, I mean, it's not super exciting at the moment. There's a few little remnants of plants growing, but really this is just, a bunch of empty soil, albeit well taken care of soil, but with a bunch of potential coming at it. So shall I let a bit of
so
time unfold?
let's see it unfold over the year.
So we're just going to press the trigger and time is playing out now.
Right, so we're starting to see early growth, so spring, some flowers.
Yeah, we're playing now at about...
Oh wow, sweet corn.
Look at this guy. So we're playing at about 10 days a second here. So we've almost gone through an entire year. I think that sweet corn's past its best now.
Yeah.
And we'll see it just start to die down.
This is a really interesting experience being inside this, as you say, model. Because for those of us with a background in film and TV, and who might have worked with time-lapse, on one level you're doing the same thing, but I think you're doing so much more as well, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, this is time-lapse, but the thing about this model here is that it really is a model. It's not an individual image, so this model can be explored from any position in space as well as any moment in time. So that allows us to go in and really hone in on the details of an individual plant. Something that we didn't know was going to be wonderful can be wonderful, and we've captured it, and we can go and revisit it and kind of see the emergence of that moment.
So that, I assume, means that the model you're creating is of interest not just to you, but to a whole range of different people, whether they're biologists or, horticulturalists or scientists. So this ability to move across time. So at the same time, it has got an aesthetic to it, which is very, very beautiful. So is it, from your point of view, is it science? Is it art? Is it both?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's definitely both. And I think for us at ScanLab, that's because of what it is, right? It's a data set. It's a highly accurate data set, which makes it measurable from a scientific point of view. It makes it, empirical, and you can really decide stuff with this. But I actually think it's just beautiful as well, and it's beautiful because it's so accurate, because it's got this kind of hyper level of detail into it. It's real, but it's kind of beyond real, because you can do things that you can't do in the real world with it.
So you've got data sets like this of other locations as part of FRAMERATE, and I think we're going to go next. We're going to the beach.
We are, of course.
To kind of explore a bit more about the technology and what's involved. But perhaps before we leave this beautiful garden, we should just let it unfold for a bit.
Yeah. Let's press play and stand back and watch the seasons unfold.
So Matt, here we are, Haysborough Beach in Norfolk. This seems to be a completely different scale of project for FRAMERATE. So perhaps you can just take us through it, how the setup is and the level of fidelity in the scan as well.
Yeah, so I mean, you're right, it's a different scale, and that's why we're here for FRAMERATE, really. So we were trying to think of what is the largest scene that we can find in the UK where we're going to be guaranteed this spatial change that we're going to be able to observe. And unfortunately for Norfolk, they really do have this guaranteed change almost on a daily basis on the coastline here at Haysborough and another site, Sidestrand, where we study. So that's what we were looking for, this enormous site where we were going to be able to observe stuff moving. And
so instead of, in the garden you've got things growing, that's the change that you're observing, but here you've got coastal erosion, daily processes with the tide, but also larger and longer term processes as well.
Yeah, and it kind of speaks to, you know, the ambitions behind the project, I guess, as well. We're observing stuff, but we have no idea what it's going to be. This really is something that we can try to predict. You know, we can try and think, yeah, this site is probably going to change a lot, but ultimately we don't know. And so the point of the tool is to be there to observe whatever happens. And
observing at a variety of scales. So here we can see the whole extent of the beach?
Yeah, so we've two scans here, and together they're capturing about 600 or 700 meters of the beach. So that's all captured in about an hour and a half on a single day. And we obviously are doing that every day. This whole scene has got something like 500 million points in it, and we should probably just zoom in and have a little bit of a look at it. So, you know, we start to transition in, and the fidelity on the beach here really is quite amazing. I mean, we can just keep on zooming in.
So now we're into is it shingle or sand? Is it this?
You got
bit of both, isn't it?
Yeah, a bit of both. So sand at the back, and then actually this layer of clay that you're standing on is a really important part we've discovered of Haysborough Beach. So this clay layer gets cyclically revealed and protected by the sand, and that's all to do with the tidal processes that are going on there.
So it's an incredible, again, you've got a model of a beach here. It's created through these scans, but it's an incredible level of detail that you're going down to, but also a huge extent. So it must be enormously problematic in terms of processing and...
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge for this project technically, right? Managing static scans is already a bit of an art form. You really are dealing with, you know, billions of points of data. But we've got that same number of points, but we want to change them at 25 frames a second. I mean, that was the whole point of FRAMERATE. That was the technical challenge that we set ourselves. That's what we've been investigating. And that's the tools that we built to be able to achieve what you're about to see. So if we keep zooming in, you know, you can really start to see the fidelity of this scan here as well, actually. I mean, let's take one more level of zoom. So, you know, these rocks here, they're only half a meter across.
Right.
And yet they've still got 100 million points on them. You know, we can't see the gaps between the points. This stuff here that, you know, looks like pebbles to us, that's not pebbles, that's gravel. Okay?
Right, okay. So we're talking about, you know, really, really small bits of rock. And then you're watching what happens to all of these elements over time, over the daily cycle, and then over the year. How long is this is the period?
Yeah, it's almost a 12-month period, so we didn't quite get 12 months, but essentially a year. So you've got, you know, your slightly calmer summer period, and then your really stormy period as you go into the autumn and the winter.
So I think what everybody would be really excited to see is to see that period over time. So maybe we can move to that.
So we're starting out here in almost an aerial view of the beach. So we're looking down with the cliff at the top, and the sea, the water would be down below us here. And, you know, speaking about it from an artistic point of view rather than a scientific point of view, it's these amazing changes in the way that the sediments laid out on the beach there that we were hoping we'd observe, but we had no idea what sort of patterns we'd be seeing there.
And of course, these are patterns that people will have observed, but only as snapshots. And so it's completely different to add the dimension of time. And as we're seeing on this, the dimension of time, and then you're able to track around your model and reveal different views at the same time. So it again, like with the garden, you've got this incredible scientific model that you're building, but also this aesthetic. It's very, very beautiful to watch this unfold.
Yeah, and for me, the beach goes from these like quite clear kind of geography lesson scenes where you can really understand things to moments like this where it's almost a bit of a trippy rave, you know? And I love that fact about this project, that you can be in a rave and a geography lesson at the same time, right? I mean, I think if we speak about the wider aims of the project, like, I would love it to be a place where people go to have the enjoyment of, you know, the exhilaration of the graphics, but you also get that learning as well.
Yeah, I can imagine kids up and down the country have to learn about longshore drift. This is going to be completely revolutionary to their kind of understanding of these processes. But also, this could be a room-size installation in a gallery anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And it would be lovely to walk into that gallery and experience it. And
yeah,
watch it unfold in front of you.
Yeah, I think just trying to get a sense of the different scales that are possible with the data, but also the different scales that the processes are happening on as well, right? You need to be able to observe an individual patch of sand because of its influence on the massive cliff on the other side, you know, because all of those things are interrelated, obviously.
And presumably, so you're partners in this project. You've got geographers and geologists as partners in this project, and has it shown them things? Captured them processes that they haven't been able to observe before? Yeah,
we spoke to the British Geological Survey actually right at the start of the project, where we were asking this kind of ominous question, really: where are we guaranteed to see change on the coast? And Norfolk was one of the places they suggested. And then we went away and we got on with the scans, and about 6 months in we took this to the British Geological Survey to show them, and they were just amazed because they were seeing things that, you know, they've been drawing diagrams of and they've been talking about for years and years and years, and this is the first time they've ever been able to actually see them happening.
And presumably, because you're capturing it in such high fidelity, they're not only able to see them happening, but they're presumably able to measure the cliff erosion from the cliffs and the different patterns across the beach.
Exactly, yeah. So you can take, you know, really hardcore scientific measurements from every single point within this data set. So you can see how far the cliff's moving back, you can see how far individual stones are moving along the beach.
To do just this single beach would, to me, looks like a whole project. But as you mentioned, you've also been, when you were doing this, you were also moving into trying to capture a forest over the course of a year. So I think that's where we're going to go next. So after the garden, the beach, enormous in scale, here you've captured a forest as part of FRAMERATE. But what are we actually looking at here?
Yeah, so this is, I guess this is composite image. This is all of the time that we've captured baked into one image. So, you know, we've got spring on the left-hand side, coming through to summer, autumn, and then winter on the far right-hand side there. So this is, yeah, all of that data baked into one.
So across these three environments, one of the amazing things I think being in the environments is that you've captured the sense of the flow of time. But is that where ScanLab started? I'm interested, was this what you thought you'd be doing in the early days with ScanLab?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was actually. Space was what we were all about capturing, right? Our backgrounds are in architecture, and when we came across these tools that enabled us to digitize the 3D world and then explore it and manipulate it in a way that we were really familiar with as 3D designers, that's what kicked ScanLab off. And the fact that the models that we were working with were so compellingly beautiful as well just made us really believe in them as storytelling devices. So, you know, we really felt like we could take audience with us because these scenes were so glorious and so believable.
And that's a really interesting thing, I think, that's common across the immersive realm, is this idea of telling stories in time and space at the same time.
Yeah, and so time is that element that's really bubbling away in our minds now over the last 3 or 4 years, and starting to scan things that move on a small scale is where it kind of happened for us first. So people moving, animals in motion, etc. But FRAMERATE and the visuals that we're seeing here today is about time on a scale which is really hard to perceive, and that was the challenge for us, that we wanted to bring together spaces and timescales that it's kind of impossible to film in any other way.
But it also, again, brings this thing, the forest environment is, again, something's not only of interest to you from a creative point of view, or us as storytellers, lots of stories in forests, of course, but also a whole series of communities of scientists who, again, you're able to show them things that they've observed in snapshots.
Yeah, I mean, let's play the forest out, and I'll tell you about a few of the things that are really interesting within this data set. So, you know, it's amazing how much forests and trees move, actually. You know, they move on a daily rhythm, they move on an annual rhythm, and they move on rhythms in relation to the temperature and the amount of rainfall and things like that. So the scientific community are really excited about this data, trying to interrogate, you know, exactly how much movement is happening in relation to the weather data on the site.
But again, it has all that data and it has all that kind of explanatory power. But again, aesthetically, it's incredibly pleasing, isn't it? There's something beautiful about this kind of rendering of point cloud type data.
Yeah, and I think in particular in the forest, it's this quite magical scene where the time element is what brings it alive. So it's not actual movement, it's time that is manifesting as movement. And I think, yeah, for me, the forest is this place where I just get lost in the point clouds, and I'd like to see them, you know, be actually used for kind of well-being almost. And you know, they're these glorious places to go and relax inside, and you know, forget about the frantic pace of life.
Matt, we've walked through the city to get here, to this virtual pub.
Yep.
And so, for the first time in this deep dive, we're starting to see things at a human scale, and humans in the frame over time. What do you think that brings us?
Well, it's something that we've always tried to do at ScanLab. You know, we turn the eyes of these machines that have come from surveying or come from autonomous vehicles, and we turn the eyes of those machines onto us as humans, because basically we think that says, well, it's intriguing, but it says a lot about us as well. And I think we do that because we believe this is the future of photography. We believe this is the future of the way that images will be taken of people and of cities. You know, your mobile phone will pretty soon, if it doesn't already, have a LiDAR scanner inside it. And autonomous vehicles use this technology to map the city. So, you know, FRAMERATE is me and my colleagues going out and physically having to take these scans every day. But really, the machines are going to be doing that for us in the future. So.
And so essentially what you're saying is machines will be compiling this kind of data continually from now on. And what you're giving us is a lens of almost the start of an aesthetic about how we think about that, how we view it.
Yeah, and I think hopefully a critical lens as well, you know, on the one hand of what's it like to take a 3D photograph of myself, like does my bum look big in 3D, all that sort of stuff, but then but more critically, like, who's taking photographs of me, who's taking photographs of the city, who owns now models of the city, right? It used to be these kind of trusted organizations going out mapping the world, albeit sometimes for pretty nefarious and colonial reasons, but organizations were doing that. Now it's big companies that are doing that and starting to take ownership of these 3D versions of the world.
So every good project ends in the pub. You know, every good interview probably should end in the pub as well. If we were in the pub with your team, the ScanLab team, I think people will be interested in this, and it will come up, I'm sure, in the Q&A, is what are the skills that you have to bring together to explore this area?
Yeah, I mean, the practice is rooted in architecture, even though we're working on architectural scales. So I think that understanding of space and that being able to work in 3D, to manipulate 3D, to understand 3D is key. But, you know, our team's made up of people with a photography background, people from computer science, people from mathematics, creative technologists, people from art management. And people from storytelling, you know, people who write scripts and have directed traditional media in the past as well.
So, fantastic, diverse, multidisciplinary team. What next for ScanLab?
What next for ScanLab? Well, I mean, first of all, this project, you know, we really feel like this project is a major part of what we want to be doing over the next couple of years. And there's kind of two sides to that, really. The data sets that you've seen today have got some incredible scientific discoveries to be found within them, and we're starting that process with the British Geological Survey, but we're really looking for partners to get stuck into this data from a scientific point of view. And we think the technique has real scientific potential as well. We'd like to be taking this technique out to some of the big kind of spatial stories around the world, whether that's desertification, glacial melt, and the results of climate change kind of globally. And then, you know, creatively, I mean, like we've had the opportunity to do today, I really long to get this piece into an artistic environment where people can walk through it and explore it on real scale. That might be the data that we've already collected. That might involve really turning the eyes of this technique onto some subjects which are important to us.
Well, it feels to me that's a good place to leave it, because that sounds like a project that should be appearing at COP26 next year, maybe, so that people can experience this in room scale in the way that we've been able to do today. So that's it for this fantastic deep dive into FRAMERATE. Thanks very much to Matt Shaw from ScanLab for showing us around. What an amazing project. And Matt will be joining us for a Q&A live straight after this session. Thanks also to our friends at White Light and for the use of their SmartStage technology. Now they'll also be doing a Q&A tomorrow live from the stage, so you can ask how their technology can fit into your programs. Hi there, everyone. Welcome to the Q&A for the ScanLab's project FRAMERATE deep dive that you'll have just seen over on the main stage. And I've been watching that session play out, and it's clear that one of the things, and it's a real joy to see this, is one of the things is just how wowed everybody is by FRAMERATE, which is an extraordinary experience for me to be with Matt. Actually inside that, the way that we tried to produce that session. So I'm delighted that I'm joined by Matt from ScanLab, who you'll have seen, but also by a very special guest who's an advisor to ScanLab, who can take us into some of the other areas about where this technology and where these ideas are leading. So Matt, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself again to everyone, since we're now live? And if people keep questions coming in the chat, I'll try and pick them up as we go.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Thanks to everyone at Beyond for having us here, and I hope you've all just enjoyed watching a little bit of FRAMERATE. So my name's Matt Shaw. I founded ScanLab Projects 10 years ago with my co-director, William Trossel, actually straight out of the Bartlett School of Architecture. And as you'll have seen, we've spent the last 10 years really being amazed by the potentials of 3D scanning technology on all sorts of scales. And we've built ourselves a bunch of very comprehensive tools to enable us to play with that data, both in real time and as pre-rendered content. And, you know, we use our craft as a way to kind of bear witness to the world and to tell, hopefully, meaningful and important stories, of which we think FRAMERATE is a kind of really amazing new tool in our toolkit and has potential to tell some really, really important stories over the coming years.
And Mariko, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, so my name is Mariko Borgo. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them. And I'm coming to you from Bodega Bay, the home of the coastal Miwok in California. So it's a little bit dark out still here. I spent almost 22 years at Apple in engineering and design. People probably best know me as the person who created the cameras and the camera teams for the iPhone and the iPad. And I had the pleasure, like the absolute deep pleasure of working with Matt and Will on a project while I was at Apple that I predictably can't talk about too much. But I'm delighted to work with them now on things that we can talk about. And so I'm delighted that you've had a chance to see a bit of FRAMERATE. I can't wait for you to see it in its full, you know, 4K, 8K resolution glory someday. But that's, yeah, it's a little about me.
Thanks. I mean, one of the first things that I think it's clear that people in the audience are asking, that, you know, their reactions are, they love the mix of art and science and the way that this makes climate change very real. And I guess actually where you left off there, Mariko, is where can you take this in terms of bringing this to live audiences, bringing this to you know, into maybe a museum environment? I think Matt, when we were doing the piece, you mentioned bringing it to a room scale. What do you think that could do in terms of engaging the audience around making environmental issues, environmental data very impactful and immediate?
Do you want me to start with that, Matt, or do you want to go?
You go, Mariko.
So I think there are a couple of things that are really beautiful here. And I've been looking at this data since last year. And it's incredible when you get the chance to see all of it, right? You talked about there's 500 million points in one scan of the beach, but there's only 1.3 millimeters between each of those points. So the ability to really be surrounded and be inside the data and be perceiving it spatially, right? We're spatial creatures with these incredible processors in our brain that are making things like that happen. So the ability to be able to shift your perspective by seeing things on all sides of you, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for the art of that to happen, whether it's in a museum, in a really large 360 theater. I'm often reminded of David Hockney's Four Seasons pieces and the ability to see different times in different spaces out of different parts of your perception, and how that twists your brain a little bit and gives you the opportunity to maybe change how you think about something. So I'd love it to see it in a museum or in a big 360 theater personally. That's
great, because I think there might be some museum folk on this session, so perhaps we can find some UK museums to show FRAMERATE. What do you think, Matt? I mean, it's got to be COP26, hasn't it? You have to take FRAMERATE to COP26.
I mean, it feels appropriate, of course. And I just to expand upon some of the things that Mariko said as well, I think there's a real difference between just being inside this data set from a single point of view. You know, there's a temptation just to drop ourselves inside this data set, a little bit like we do with the garden scene at the start of the presentation, and be in it as if you're transplanting yourself into that world. But I actually think we're interested in doing something much more curated than that, where, like Mariko says, you might have different timescales playing out at different speeds in different parts of your peripheral vision, and playing with timescale, playing with spatial scale as well. So I don't think this is just a simple case of kind of 360 immersion. I think it's a multi-surface, multi-scalar, time-based thing. Maybe multiple rooms for multiple locations or something like that. And there's something else which we've always been slightly saddened when this project ends up as a linear piece as well, which is that you don't get this opportunity to play certain bits of it on repeat as well. And there are certain individual scenes in the kind of 20 minutes that you've just seen now, which I would watch for 20 minutes, 10 seconds again and again and again, because they're such deep artworks just as individuals that you can almost watch every pixel of every scene looping and changing. So I think, yeah, pushing this project out onto many surfaces would allow you to do that.
Okay, I just wondered if we've got a few questions here that are inevitably, when people I think see a project as engaging as this, and you've got an audience who are exploring tools and techniques and aesthetics and styles. They want to know particular things which hopefully you can enlighten them on. So one of the things was, this is a question from Emma Cooper, is how large are the files you're dealing with? What are the constraining factors in creating this? And in temporal terms, could you go for beyond longer than a year?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer in reverse order. Could we go longer than a year? For sure. I mean, I actually think there's a little bit more precedent for going longer than a year in some respects. Scientists quite often work on these every year for a decade or every 5 years for half a century kind of approach. So actually there is some kind of aerial scan data of coastal areas, for example, like that, conducted by the Environment Agency every year or every 5 years. I think what our project kind of threw into that mix scientifically was like this mad frequency of data that was just deemed impossible to the scientific community before. And, that comes down, I think, to the risk-taking position that the Audience of the Future funding kind of allowed us to be placed in as well. We could do this mad thing that doesn't seem sensible from the outset, but the results that come from it are completely enlightening in a really surprising way. And I think as well, the file size depends on how many frames you take. You might take those frames every second of an entire city over the course of a day, or you might take those frames once a year over the complete birth of a city in another part of the world, So you can get to big data very quickly with this technique. And how have we handled that? Well, everything that you've just seen, either the real-time section of the presentation or all of the pre-rendered stuff, it's all coming through bespoke software that ScanLab have been building for the last 10 years. But I mean, this really is the biggest data challenge that we have ever set up for ourselves. And, seconds of this movie are playing many terabytes of data at a time. So we had to build this kind of new file format for animated point cloud data, where each frame of that data might be kind of half a terabyte or something like that. And it was kind of bonkers. We had to set up separate servers for separate shots to make this film, and we would really have to nail every sequence that we wanted to get out of one of our sites, because we'd have to take it off the servers then in order to render the garden scene, so there were some crazy kind of logistics on that front involved as well.
Great. And one of the other questions that Lewis Mitchell is asking is, when you do scans, and I think this might take us into another area as well, he's saying, is there a way of containing the spill from when you're doing scans? So if you're scanning, I guess, in an urban environment rather than natural environment, so that the scans don't enter through windows and other openings. So are there privacy concerns? I guess those scans that you were showing at the end of the city and the pub, are there privacy concerns about the technology that you're using? And then perhaps we can go on to discuss the privacy implications of the technologies as they evolve.
I'll just say one little thing and then hand over to America on that, I think. But, the first time I ever saw a terrestrial laser scanner, kind of one of the ones that would operate on a building scale, I was an architecture student, and I kind of snuck my way into a geomatic engineering lesson. And this guy popped out a laser scanner, and we took it out into the quad in UCL, and he scanned this quadrangle area, you know, these kind of nice ornate buildings. And all of the engineering students were kind of amazed by the accuracy of it and all those sorts of things. And I saw it go in through the window of one of the offices on that quad, and you could see the books on the window shelf in there. And that's when I was just like, oh, wow, this technology is insane. But yeah, what are the issues around privacy involved here? And I think that legally, I don't think the boundaries have been really set with LiDAR data that much. And, you know, you've got to think now, who is walking around our cities capturing data in this way? Autonomous vehicles are one of the kind of major future collectors of spatial data like this. And it's big companies that kind of will end up owning that data. But also everybody with a mobile phone is gonna start seeing the world in this way. Even if they never see that data, their mobile phone is using that data in order to better understand the world around us. So, you know, I think the memories of spaces are going to be perpetually collected in this way, kind of whether we like it or not and whether we're aware of it or not. And that's kind of one of ScanLab's missions, is to do things that make people aware of that.
America, as one of the people who brought digital photography to billions and took on privacy, I suppose, we all had to get used to the privacy implications of that. Do you think that there are different privacy concerns here, or from the nature of the technology, or is it an extension of the same issues?
I mean, it's probably a little bit of yes and in that scenario. I think in the same way that high resolution photography being everywhere, as well as cameras showing up in a lot of places and in IoT and sort of instrumented homes and those kinds of things, it becomes really important to get thoughtful in a proactive way. And, you know, something we've all been chatting a bit about, and to state it out loud, right? All three of us on this Zoom are pretty white. And it's critical to think about the ethics of things, not just from a technology perspective and not just from a journalism perspective, but in the hands of everyone. I mean, I'm walking around with an iPhone right now that can take some unbelievably precise LiDAR scans, and it's doing that every time I take a photo right now, or a video to help with focus and storing off some of that. And I think that one of the things is, it's a complex question. Consent is really important, and what consent means to different people is very different. And my version of that may be different than someone else's. You might be surprised at both the power that the democratization of something like this brings, right? You know, I have a number of friends who having their iPhone be able to turn on a video very quickly from the lock screen has been critical to their safety, as they are Black folks who have been pulled over while they're driving for absolutely no good reason. And they've shared with me that that's been critical to their safety, right? So I think that from a ScanLab perspective, I appreciate that ScanLab is thinking deeply about data sovereignty. I know 2 days ago, we talked about a little bit about one of the projects where that's been a deep interrogation inside of the project around this, your stories, your scans, like who owns your data? And that's tied intimately with privacy, which is tied intimately with justice, which is tied intimately with environmental justice. And so I think it's critical for us to be aware and have a conversation, and really importantly to make art, because art is a way that we all explain complex things to one another so that we can have conversations across silos and across boundaries and get in and understand how we make something that's good for everyone.
I think that's,
Can I just,
it's clear it's clear from the way people have responded to this thing the first time that they do interpret it as art, that it has an aesthetic. But I found it it's still an extraordinary thing that one interprets it as art, but it is data as well. And so you've become involved with scientists who are as excited about this as you are about it aesthetically. I'm interested in where that goes next as well. Do you think you know? Obviously, you've talked to environmental scientists and geologists, I think, but where does that where can that go? This kind of dialogue where you've got a piece that audiences can respond to as art, so they feel engaged and involved, but also scientists.
Yeah, I mean, I think the scientific ways forward kind of, you know, there's two directions for that straight away. The first is that we've got all of this data from this kind of phase one of FRAMERATE, I guess. And I feel like the discoveries to be found in those data sets are really quite enormous, and ScanLab can be the enablers of those discoveries, but we don't know even what we're looking for. You know, we don't know the moment in a particular crop germination process that is kind of vital to something. So somehow we need to set ourselves up with a platform of this data that gets it out to the right people in the right scientific community so that they can use it and explore it and are enabled to use it maybe through some of our tools, so they don't just get these kind of multiple terabyte drops of data and then every system that they're ever used to kind of crumbles straight away. So that's a process that we're really, really excited to enable. And then the other thing is, you know, see what we've done with FRAMERATE as a prototype, and what should we really be turning the eyes of this technique towards? What are the big spatial issues out there in the world that really can't be observed, and you know, the discoveries can't be made and the stories can't be told through any other lens other than this technique that we're working on here.
In America, where do you see those links where you can use this combination of the aesthetic to engage, where an audience feel able to be engaged in it? They have like permission. You have permission to be engaged in art. We don't always have permission to be engaged in science.
Yeah, well, I mean, my hope, I studied science and then went into technology and then became sort of a humanist in design, right, as a piece of that. And my hope is that the art is a communication tool, and that this permission that you're talking about to engage with art gives people the confidence to know that they can look at data. I think it's really critical right now, and a bunch of the questions are starting to be asked. People say, you know, jargon is a gatekeeper, and art is a way for us to get around jargon and get around technical jargon and find the place that lets people believe, right, no, I understand what data is. I can ask intelligent questions about data, and people believing that they can ask intelligent questions about data and starting to see and perceive and feel it themselves in an interesting way, I think is really empowering. And that's something that I see as critical to the next step, and a great thing that ScanLab is going to help bring forward.
And for data to be so visibly real and something that people can go out and touch as well, and in a way for data to be quite local as well. You know, I think some people that shouldn't be forgotten in the project that you guys have seen today are a guy called Brad and a guy called Paul, who went out every day into the Norfolk countryside and collected this data, you know, and it was very important to us that they were people from Norfolk. They're actually landscape photographers who knew these places intimately, and you know, they could read those landscapes in a different way that really helped this project be successful. But you know, they always kept this really local voice in this project as well. The WhatsApp group from this project and the little daily check-ins from them is an artwork in itself, and it's a study in how people, you know, on the front line of these conditions, you know, coastal erosion, for example, are the voices that really have to accompany the scientific story that's being told as well. I think that's something that we really can't forget when we start, whoever we ends up being, start talking over these visuals, you know. And that particularly applies if this project follows the kind of global ambitions that we've got for it as well.
Got just a question, same question, two people, phrased slightly differently, about which connects with that. Is so Deborah Kroll is asking, I wonder if we could hear some thoughts about the carbon footprint of something so incredibly data intensive. It's breathtaking, but I wonder at what cost. And she's anxious to point out, not singling FRAMERATE out, but it's a data intensive project and it's so kind of manifest. And Emily Godden's asking, do you measure your own environmental impacts at all?
I think the first thing to say is that we can always do better on that front. My sister actually works for a tree conservation charity, so ScanLab and BGCI have a relationship whereby we make a bit of a donation every year towards tree conservation in Africa, but we're not very good and formal at watching, not as good as we should be at watching our carbon footprint. And you know, that's a problem that we're quite acutely aware of as well, because we, until this year anyway, we go around the world quite a lot, right, with our instruments. And this year has been really quite powerful for us in the fact that, you know, we have worked on projects in Guatemala, in the Falkland Islands, and in Egypt without having to go there. And that's meant that we've helped much more local people to use our technology and to produce results that are as good as if we'd been to that place. So it's really helped us understand how little we might need to travel in the future. I mean, FRAMERATE specifically, we really wanted FRAMERATE to be this kind of bicycle-powered daily set of scans. And we were really torn at the start, picking these sites across Norfolk that were going to, you know, prove this technique and tell the most exciting stories versus having to get in a car every day and drive to them. And we ended up, we have to be honest, we ended up driving to these sites every single day. It was about a kind of 45-mile round trip every day. So the project has a carbon footprint. Obviously, big data projects have a big carbon footprint as well. We do this stuff locally as opposed to up in the cloud, which I think probably limits the environmental costs for that work to a certain extent. But yeah, you know, I think when you fold this out onto the scale of every vehicle driving through every city, perpetually creating models of those cities, then your data starts to get worryingly big, and the impact could be enormous at that stage.
I was just wondering, there you refer there to the other projects that you've done around the world, and I think some people will have seen in the showcase, will have seen the Falklands project, which, as you say, is about democratizing. So how do we get from where FRAMERATE and ScanLab are now to people being able to create projects like this, use data like this on their own in the democratization process?
Do you want to go, Matt? Do you have a?
No, you go, Mary.
So this is not an absolute immediate question, but I'll say that I'm pretty excited by the things, you know, I've had this phone for a few days, and the applications, there are applications you can use to take some scans. I've been scanning some rocks out on the beach in front of where I am, and I'm, you know, I helped make the camera, and I'm still stunned by how powerful what's in my hand is. What I'll say is I think the tools are still very raw, and the tools are still being investigated and still being drawn together and looked at. And there's a big call for that, right? There's a big call for helping people be able to take that beautiful scan every time and then interrogate it themselves, and to play with that data as an image in the same way that we did with still images and video and then time lapse, right? The sort of one button aspect of it. But it's happening really soon. And I think that the way we look at the big data coming from various large architectural scanners or from these cars or the things that are coming in and play with them can inform, especially if we bring young people into the process there, which is why I'm excited about the Falklands project so much, right? To not be directed by all of us, but to be directed by what young people are looking at doing with the technology, because I think they see around corners in different ways than our brains do, right? It's a different perspective. So it's coming soon, but I'm looking forward to learning from some people about what that might be.
Is that how you see it, Matt? Soon, but soon, not today, but soon?
Yeah, always not today, but soon. But then I always think there will be a level of, there'll always be levels of data that that everybody can use, and then there'll be these levels beyond as well. So as I say, ScanLab kind of, I think a lot of our work in future will be about empowering other people to use their tools and about telling their stories, not our stories. But I also think there is a critical role for people like us to be thinking what's coming next, and in an art context, highlighting some of the positives and some of the negatives about that as well. You know, I think that's really, really crucial. So I'm very conscious for ScanLab to always, you know, the big one for me is 3-dimensional CCTV. Actually, I think that's a really, you know, on the one hand, that means that spatial memories of every street might be this thing of the near future, whereby, you know, you can go back and revisit something that happened on a street, and from every kind of angle. There was this amazing Guardian advert from the 80s sometime, which talked about how you tell a story from several different positions, and how that was important. But yeah, you know, there's some sinister applications of 3-dimensional CCTV as well, and we've seen how that plays out in various parts of the world at various times, and I think we'll be seeing that 3-dimensionally happening soon as well.
Okay, got a couple of questions, just which are more around the current state. So two quick ones, and I think this one's from Rob Vincent, who's a very well-known video and film director. He says he's always loved the ScanLab look and the aesthetic, ghostly, almost nightmarish. But is there anything you can do to make it more daylight and more light? And then, well, let's get a reaction to that one first.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question that we're often asked. You know, it's hard for us to see beyond this look that we've built ourselves and fallen in love with ourselves. I mean, black background is it's kind of this infinite nothingness for us, which is why we always kind of fall back on it. And it's the best representation of this, like, forever beyond, you know, and our data trickles off into the edge. So we often try to pull ourselves away from it, and we almost always end up back on it. I mean, like, the interesting thing about most of the projects that you see from ScanLab is that the lighting is kind of baked in from the moment of capture. It's another one of the things that is true to the moment that this data was collected, as opposed to being put in post. So when you're dealing with a time-lapse project, actually it becomes like managing the massive variation in daylight conditions that we had across the streets. But it does become an enormous new can of worms if you want to light this data in post, and that is possible, but it's dramatically more complex. The other thing I'll just say about lighting is that we quite often work with students, and we ran a workshop in San Diego a few years ago, and the students there all rebelled against black background, and we had this kind of amazing display of neon backgrounds and stuff like that, which, and they you know, they all went away after the first day of conversations, and like basically I think, you know, came up with a pact together that none of them would use the black background. They were fighting against it so strong.
And I just say, to add on to that,
yeah.
Especially in this moment where we're thinking about how we're telling people that they're looking at data, and help them understand intuitively that they are working with things in space, right? Black traditionally connotes space and things being in that spatial region. And so I think that as that's more understood, there's more of an opportunity to branch out as well. But I think the aesthetic is definitely leaning on the understanding of what black means. Yes,
yeah, no, I can see that, because it's very clear in that way, but it's also very easy to interpret, I guess, because it pulls the data forward into people's consciousness. One question here from Emily Godden, which to a certain extent I think you may think you've answered, but I do wonder about it, which is the session a question of scale is, how big a landscape could you scan using this technique? So I think if, today the beach, tomorrow, what kind of landscape?
I mean, we ran a project in Yosemite National Park about 3 or 4 years ago now, which was called Post-Lenticular Landscapes. And it was very directly a kind of tribute in a way to the early and the great photographers that have really well, imaged and made Yosemite as iconic as it is through some of their photographs. People like Adams, but also the early photographers, Watkins, Muybridge, etc. In that project there, we were using a laser scanner with a 5-kilometer range on it. So we were getting up early in the morning, sticking 35 kilos on our backs, climbing a mountain, and then scanning from the top of that mountain. So scanning 5 kilometers in every direction. There are terrestrial scanners that go up even bigger than that, I think 7 or 8 kilometers is the range there. But then some of the work that we've been doing in Guatemala puts LiDAR sensors on the underside of an airplane and covers vast areas of the Guatemalan rainforest in a matter of hours as well. LiDAR sensing can happen from satellites as well. So I think I never think of data set, well, I do think of data sets in terms of their physical scale, but then I also think of them in terms of their resolution. You could have a model of, we've got a really nice LiDAR scan of the moon, but that's probably got less, about the same number of points on it as the kind of LiDAR scans that I try to take of my daughters now on a regular basis. So, that you can have tiny objects with lots of data and vast objects with minimal data as well.
I would say, and to add on to that, the other thing that's beautiful about LiDAR data and the systems that you've built is your ability to precision register multiple scans together, since they are 3D in their data, is really different than taking a 2D photograph with either a digital sensor or a piece of film when you're trying to register and make a space. So to make a stacked set of LiDAR scans that looks as one, that is incredibly large at these great precisions, is not just possible, but a thing that you're doing.
I wonder if one of the things that looking at FrameRate and hearing you talk, and the thing it makes me almost feel is, when we look back on this and similar LiDAR projects in the way that we look at Muybridge's photos, in the early study of movement, in what they revealed at the time was remarkable, but it marks a junction point in time between one way of looking at the world and another. Does it feel, I mean, that's a terrible burden to put on your shoulders, but does it feel like that?
I mean, I'll be a bit cheeky and take that, so Matt doesn't have to. That's a big reason that I'm working with Matt and Will at this point, is because I really do see them, and I hope that 100 years in the future, ScanLab's name is shown and the works are in the major museums and in the major ways that we go back and look at this story, because I do think that they're pushing that boundary between what a technology can do and should do, and turning it into something more in the same way that those folks did. And then the people who were doing early video as well.
Yeah, just say something as well. I mean, I think, we obviously take great inspiration from people like Muybridge, good and bad things about his life and career. But
sure.
One thing that I do feel like he was doing was taking his tools to breaking point and not being afraid to be at that edge where it could all go disastrously wrong, or absolutely amazingly. And that is a core belief at ScanLab, is that you don't know your tools until you're breaking them on a regular basis. And there's this moment of like, manufacturer specifications, and then there's this little bit over here, and then there's completely broken, and this little bit here where you're beyond manufacturer specifications, and the tool starts to behave in an unexpected and kind of creative way. That is the most exciting place for us always. And it's sometimes actually harder for us. I mean, I think FrameRate operates in that space, and we've had to make the tools, we have to now make the tools to expand that space for us. But in a way, as a younger practice, kind of 8 or 9 years ago, it was easier for us to do those kind of wild and quick experimentations. And so I think that's a bit of a call out to other people as well. I mean, everyone should get playing with this stuff, playing and pushing is the best way to innovate.
Well, I can see in this whole session and in the comments in the chat and the questions we've had, I think you're absolutely doing that. You're inspiring a whole group of people who are working with point cloud to see what you can manifest at the moment. And I think that's a really good place to end it on, actually. I think what you've shown us is we can appreciate this data as art, and that possibly expands, well, certainly expands the audience who feel that they can engage with this. For me, I think the ultimate feeling that's new about what you've done together is that thing of seeing both time and space, because we often work in media that do one or the other and visualize them. I think making data real, and I think you're very, very aware of preparing us for a period where this kind of data, this temporal, three-dimensional data, becomes ubiquitous. And even if we don't know exactly what's that's going to do to our lives, I think it's good to have experts who are out there thinking about that and making it manifest for us all to consider. So I just want to thank you very much for allowing us to see FRAMERATE. I know you were saying earlier you've been hiding this project for most of the last year, and I know you don't want it to be seen in 2D, which is the nature of how we have to communicate with each other at the moment. But it's been a real pleasure to show FRAMERATE and share it with the Beyond audience. So thank you very much, America Borogrove, advisor to Scanlan Projects, and to Matthew Shaw, founder of the company. Thank you.